There are 21 books in the New Testament, and those 21 books are written by some 9 or 10 men, depending upon who you think wrote the book of Hebrews. Only one of these men had known Jesus since he was a boy. He was not one of the 12 apostles, and yet within 15 years of the death of Christ, he had risen to prominence in the church and was one of the leading men, looked to for advice, for counsel, and for leadership. He was the bishop of the church in Jerusalem, one of the strongest and most influential people in the New Testament church. And interestingly enough, he was highly respected by the Jewish, non-Christian Jewish community of Jerusalem, and of course nearly revered by Christians throughout that part of the world. He was, in fact, Jesus' younger brother, James. He was, I think all scholars basically are agreed on this, the one who wrote the letter, the epistle of James, that we have in the New Testament. And we have one and only one letter from this man. James was no theologian. He was rather a pastor. You know, there are those people who will substitute theology for faith, and they'll substitute doctrine for true religion. James was not in that category. His approach was that of a pastor. He wrote about true religion, that is, the way people deal with people, the way they interact with people, the things that they do as opposed to the things that they say. And since this man wrote only one letter in the New Testament, I would say that we ought to assume that what he did take the time to write to us, he thought was very important. Today I want to look at and arrive at a lesson from the book of James. James opens with a very familiar passage. In fact, down through the years, I think every preacher who has ever stood before people to preach has sooner or later cited this passage in the beginning of the book of James that deals with trials and with tests. He says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations, knowing that the trying of your faith works patience." And he goes on to give us this encouraging word that when things happen to us and when things go wrong, that God is with us. We do learn from them and we do grow from them. And all that is good and an important lesson from James, and one that's been developed a great deal. But a little later in this first chapter, he comes to something I think very important. In verse 12 he said, continuing on this same theme, "Blessed is the man that endures temptation, for when he is tried, he shall receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to them that love him. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempt he any man." In other words, all of the temptations that come your way aren't coming from God. Every man is tempted when he is drawn away by his own lust and enticed. And when lust is conceived, it brings forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, brings forth death. Now, I don't want you to make any mistake, he says, my brethren. Every good and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, in whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. But all the good things come down from God, and only good things come down from God. God doesn't cast stumbling blocks in your way or tempt you or try to hurt you in any way. Of his own will, he begat us with the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. You know, there is something you could write on your wall. That's something to remember. That's something to live by. Every man be swift to hear and slow to speak. What percentage of the problems and the struggles that we have between people in this world today would be laid aside completely if we simply followed that one admonition? Swift to hear and slow to speak. And how many times in your lifetime have you gotten yourself in trouble because you weren't paying attention when someone said something? Or you were talking when you should have had your mouth shut. You said something you wished you hadn't have said later. Be swift to hear and slow to speak, and I think more important than that, very slow to wrath. And this is something when you see these little needlepoint things that put on their wall. This is one that belongs on everybody's wall. For the wrath of man works not the righteousness of God. You get mad once in a while, don't you? There are times when you get absolutely furious. There are times you feel like throwing things, breaking things, kicking things. The old saying goes, the man who came home from work slammed the door and yelled at his wife. The wife turned around and yelled at the kids, and the kid went outside and kicked the dog. There's got to be somebody at the end of all that. The wrath of man does not work the righteousness of God. I came to this place and I got a little curious. I decided to pull out my computer and do a little quick word study on the word wrath, anger, and so forth. And when I ran back to the Old Testament, what I found surprised me. Did you know that the word for anger in the Old Testament is the Hebrew word for nose? Yeah, nose. You know, the one right there between your eyes on your face. I mean, when it talks about God had Adam laid out on the ground, he bent down and he blew into his nostrils the breath of life, the word nose. And when it talks about, a man who prays and turns his face to the ground, actually the way it is worded in Hebrew, it says he turns his nose to the ground. The word then, when it talks about a person being mad, he said that he was angry about something, it says that he had a bad nose, or his nose was this way. He had nose. That when it speaks of God, for example, his wrath began to rise up, or his wrath being kindled, his nose is kindled. It's a curious expression. The French now, they'll say that a wine has a good nose. That is, you can waft it back and forth under the nose and you can sniff it and it smells good. The wine has a good nose. Well, in the Hebrew, the nose was, I suppose, the seat of anger. The Hebrew language is curious in this regard because it uses body parts to deal with different kinds of emotions. Things come, for example, when you're reading through your King James Bible and you come to the word reins. In the Hebrew, the word is kidneys. He said, my reins in the night troubled me. He said, my kidneys. He doesn't mean that he was getting up and going to the bathroom too often. What do you mean? The kidneys were a seat of emotion. The kidneys, the heart, and by that they basically meant the innermost core of a man's being. The bowels and the loins are often referred to as the seats of different kinds of feelings and emotions by people. So what came as a total surprise, that when God's anger was kindled, his nose was kindled. When his wrath waxed hot, his nose was hot. And I couldn't help but wonder, I think it was Allie that mentioned to me that maybe that's where our expression, your nose is out of joint, comes from. Certainly it is in the same spirit as that. But a person's nose is hot, he is angry. The wrath of man, though, if you come to the Greek, by the way, the Greek word for anger is orge, from which our word orgy comes from. A strange combination of words, a little different, but it also is used to express the same thought as is expressed in the Hebrew. The wrath of man does not work the righteousness of God. So if you're mad, if you're angry, you can be reasonably sure that the things that you are doing and saying while you are angry are not working the righteousness of God. Now, I'm coming back to James in just a moment, but just for a moment, let's go back to the book of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 24. Make no friendship with an angry man, and with a furious man you shall not go. Now, I'm going to explain to you in a minute why I think this is so important related to what James is trying to say in his epistle. In Proverbs 22 and verse 24, make no friendship with an angry man, and with a furious man you shall not go. Why? Lest you learn of his ways and get a snare to your soul. So by and large, stay away from angry people. It is interesting, he says that there is a person who is, I suppose by temperament, wouldn't you suppose, an angry person? Because friendship is an ongoing relationship. It's just not merely being in the presence of, right? So when it says don't make any friendship with an angry man, we're talking about a person who has a part of their normal temperament is they tend to be angry a lot of the time. Don't have people like that for your friends. Why? Because you're going to tend to learn from them, and you're going to tend to learn to be like them, and it's going to do you in. Proverbs 19, just a couple of pages back. Some of these just come in short little pieces, but they're important. Proverbs 19, verse 19. A man of great wrath shall suffer punishment. Notice, a man of great nose shall suffer punishment. For if you deliver him, you will have to do it again. Boy, isn't that the truth? You get a person that has that temperament that gets mad, gets himself into trouble, you go down and bail him out. You get him out of jail. Do you suppose that's the last time you're ever going to have to do that? No, it's not. Probably, in fact, he'd be better off and you'd be better off if you just left him there. In the 29th chapter, Proverbs 29 and verse 22, An angry man stirs up strife, and a furious man abounds in transgression. Notice, the anger is just going to get him into trouble. There is no way he can avoid it. A man's pride will bring him low, but honor shall uphold the humble in spirit. Now, here's my question. Do you see any relationship between verse 22 and verse 23? An angry man stirs up strife, and a furious man abounds in transgression. A man's pride shall bring him low, but honor shall uphold the humble in spirit. Now, do you see any connection at all between anger and pride? Most of the time when people are mad, it is pride that is at stake. And the person whom you might describe as a truly humble person does not get mad a lot. Now, anger, focused on an object, is known as hatred. You know, I am angry. I feel angry. I am furious. But when that anger becomes directed at a person, it becomes hatred, and now I am not merely angry, I hate him. Now, when this moves from anger to hatred, it becomes sin. And it becomes sin of very serious kind because of the damage that it can do to other people. In Proverbs 26, just a few pages back for you, in verse 23. Proverbs 26 and verse 23. Burning lips and a wicked heart are like a potsherd covered with silver dross. He that hates dissembles with his lips and lays up deceit within him. When he speaks fair, don't believe him, because there are 7 abominations in his heart. Whose hatred is covered by deceit, his wickedness shall be showed before the whole congregation. Whoever digs a pit shall fall in it, and he that rolls a stone, it will return upon him. Hatred, anger, these things are, anger, simply being angry or having your nose out of joint does not have to be a sin. The Bible says, be you angry and sin not. But when that anger becomes focused on an individual, it does become sin. Now, returning to James for a moment, just to consider what it is that he says, that the wrath of man does not work the righteousness of God. Just this a couple of weeks ago, a very good friend of mine resigned from the ministry of the Church of God International. And the word will be passed on to everyone shortly, but I want to say a good word for the gentleman because we have served together for a long time. His name is Mr. Ted Phillips, and he didn't resign because he was mad at anybody. Mr. Phillips came to some conclusions which he and I discussed at great length. They were doctrinal matters, and they were doctrinal matters that I have to conclude are relatively minor. Mr. Phillips believes that the Old Testament Passover, the original Passover, took place at the beginning of the 14th day of the month instead of toward the end of the 14th day of the month, as we teach and as we believe. He also believes that there are some technical differences in the Hebrew calendar as we currently teach it, which this year, in his own convictions, and he believes this in his heart of hearts, causes the Feast of Tabernacles to begin one day earlier than we are observing the Feast of Tabernacles. And because he didn't want to cause anybody any problem, and because he loves Mr. Armstrong, and he loves me, and he loves all the rest of us, he turned in his resignation. In fact, his resignation is tantamount really to a retirement. After all, Mr. Phillips is 66 years old, and he has served long, and he has served hard. At the ministerial conference this year, Mr. Phillips came up to me toward the end as he was getting ready to leave, and both of us had tears in our eyes, and we put our arms around each other and gave each other a big hug, and he looked at me and says, I love you. And I looked him in the eye, and I said, I love you too, Ted. Because we have known each other a long time, and we've been through a lot together. And I thought to myself, how good it is that both of us understand that the wrath of man does not work the righteousness of God. Just because we differ on some point of doctrine does not mean that we have to be angry with one another. It does not mean that we have to hate one another. We don't have to start calling one another names. We can love each other and respect each other and go on together wherever our paths do cross and in whatever way we're called upon to work. If I were ever sick and anywhere near Mr. Phillips, I would call him just like that, to come to anoint me, to pray for me, for I know where his heart is, and I know where his faith is, and I know he's a very sincere man. We have our differences from time to time. I wonder if you understand at all how rare what happened between Mr. Armstrong and Mr. Phillips, myself and Mr. Phillips is. So much of the time, when people differ, and they decide that those differences in their own heart and their own mind are sufficient that they should do things differently, how often they fall into a finger-pointing, angry, acrimonious, accusing point of view and attitude toward the other person. It is so common, it is profoundly discouraging the way that it takes place. James wrote out, the letter is addressed, James, a servant of God, a servant of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. He addresses it out to all kinds of people, and I have to presume that James had reason to see in the workings of people. After all, he was there at the Jerusalem conference when there was a lot of disputing and arguing and bickering. Paul, of course, had every reason to see all this at work in people's hearts, of how easy it is for people to come to hate one another over theology. As I said at the beginning, some people confuse theology with faith, and they confuse doctrine with religion. They don't understand what the real issues are in Christianity, in the service of Christ, and working together. And they've forgotten completely that the wrath of man does not work the righteousness of God. Later, in this passage, down in verse 26, he said, if any man among you, this is James 1:26, if any man among you seem to be religious, and bridles not his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this man's religion is vain. It's a continuation of the thought before. He seems to be a religious person, but he's angry all the time, always spouting off, and always accusing people of things. His religion is vain. Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this. How many times do you look at this to remind us? Pure religion. That is, which comes up before God as a worship of Him that is honorable, respected, and that He appreciates. It is to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world. The commentaries point out this about James, that he is no theologian. He is not a person out there preaching doctrine. All of this theoretical stuff is not for him. What he is concerned about how people deal with people. In the second chapter of James, beginning in verse 1, my brethren, have not the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory, with respect of persons. For if there come into your assembly a man with gold ring and goodly apparel, and there come also a poor man in vile raiment, and you have respect to him that wears the gay clothing, and say to him, sit here in a good place, and you say to the poor, stand over there, or sit here under my footstool. Aren't you partial in yourselves, and you have become judges who have evil thoughts? Now, I am really grateful to James that this is here, because it is very tempting, as people come along, to be drawn toward people who are well-dressed, drawn toward people who are good-looking, toward people who are well-favored, whose lives have worked for them. They are educated, they are intelligent, they can carry on a conversation. It is so easy to drift toward these people, to become involved with these people, to favor these people, and to ignore or shove aside or even to treat rudely people who are not dressed properly, can't talk properly, may bore you in conversation to tears, who are maybe even an irritant in some ways because of some mannerism that they have got. One of the things that churches and preachers and always work on year in and year out is helping people to understand that it's necessary for us not only to love the people where it comes naturally. It's a responsibility we have to love those people where it does not come naturally. To love the unlovable. Because in point of fact, that is the very point behind God's love for man. His ability to love the unlovable. So along comes someone who is well-dressed. Along comes someone who is really good-looking. Along comes another fellow, on the other hand, who's a little bit ugly. Not a little bit ugly. He's been beat on with an ugly stick. Not well-dressed. Old clothes. A little bit worn. And so the tendency is to kind of pretend he isn't there and spend your time with the person who is well-favored. Don't do it. James says you do that, he says you have become a judge with evil thoughts. Listen, my beloved brethren, hasn't God chosen the poor of this world, rich in faith, heirs of the kingdom, which he has promised to them that love him? I want you to know something. I've been in the ministry now for over 30 years. And as I hearken back on the people that I have met, have listened to, have talked with, the truth of what this man says comes home to me. The people that I have known who have had faith have by and large been the poor. Somehow or other, the people who have more tend to trust what they have. The people who are well-favored tend to trust their looks. The people who can dress well tend to trust that. The people who have money tend to trust that. The poor tend to trust God, for there just isn't much else there to do. And I know I'm just as sure as I can be as I stand here before you, that apart from the tithe, when the time comes to give, there is no question in my mind that over the years, the poor have given much more to God's work than have the wealthy. And you know, it may come as a bit of a surprise to you. I think in aggregate they may have given more in raw terms, not just in percentages. I know the poor give a higher percentage of what they have than do the rich. In the aggregate, they may even have given more because there are more of them than there are of the rich. The poor of this world, rich in faith. You know, the poor don't have that much to lose, and so they don't worry so much about losing it. I think oftentimes those people who are poor are freer, in a sense, to love God and to love His people and to serve God and to serve His people than are the people who have. Verse 13. Actually, verse 12, so speak you and so do as they that shall be judged by the law of liberty. For he shall be judged, or he shall have judgment without mercy, that has showed no mercy, and mercy rejoices against judgment. What does it profit, my brethren, if a man says he has faith and doesn't have works? Can faith save him? You know, you can talk about your faith all you want to. The Lord's my shepherd. My shepherd. You can talk about answers to prayer. He said, if a brother or a sister is naked or destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, notwithstanding you don't give them the things that are needful for the body, what's the profit? What have you accomplished? You can talk about faith all you want to, but the place where faith comes down to people is where it counts. Oh, sure, be blessed, brother. I'll make my wave of my hand out here. I'll pronounce God's blessing upon you, and I'll say to you, be warmed and filled. But if you go away, still cold and hungry, what is my blessing worth? You say you have faith? God says the place to have your faith is where people meet people, and the place that it touches, and the place of changing something in somebody else's life. Even so, faith, if it has not works, is dead, being alone. What a simple statement. Faith, if it has not works, is dead, being alone. You know, it's a curious thing that Martin Luther called James an epistle of straw. It is a curious thing that because James was notably a Jew, because he not only was a Jew but was the most Jewish of all the New Testament writers, because he honored God's law and because he honored works, he was looked upon with contempt by theologians down through the years. Because you see, theology is not faith. And doctrine is not works. And you can preach, and you can teach, and you can have all these great and glorious truths that you proclaim to people. But unless somehow all the preaching, all the teaching, all the theology, and all the doctrine causes someone to treat somebody else differently, you're wasting your time. Aren't we? Unless somehow, some way we can treat someone else differently, we have accomplished nothing. That's what that love chapter in 1 Corinthians 13 is all about when it comes down to it. Chapter 3, verse 1. My brethren, don't get in a hurry to be teachers. Masters simply means teachers. But be not many of you masters, knowing that we shall receive the greater judgment. And it is a sobering thing to reflect upon when we get up in front of you people in the week and begin to proclaim out of the Bible It really is a warning to stay very close to what we read in these pages, because we are going to be judged for it. He said, in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same as a perfect man and able to bridle the whole body. Yeah. Because I think back, of the times that I know I have said things that have hurt, the times that I have said things I wish I could get back somehow, and the realization that once it's out and once it's said, you'll never get it back. Behold, we put bits in horses' mouths that we may obey us. We can turn around the whole body. Big old, great big draft horse. We can turn that horse. Behold the ships that go there, they're huge. And they're driven of fierce winds, but they're turned around by a very small helm wherever the helmsman wants it to go. Even so, the tongue is a little member, and it boasts great things. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindles. Ah, the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity, and so is the tongue among our members. One of the reasons we get into so much trouble is because we spend so much time talking about our religion. Yeah, we spend so much time talking about it, and we don't spend anywhere near the time thinking about it, praying about it, and doing it. Actually applying it to some other person with whom we've met. And the tongue is a fire. We talk our religion, and we cause sometimes more trouble than we help. The tongue is a little member. It sets on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire of hell. Every kind of beast, of birds, of serpents, of things in the sea is tamed and has been tamed of mankind. It's interesting, you go down to SeaWorld and you can see them just handle these great, huge beasts. It's unbelievable what they can do with whales. I'm surprised in a way to hear James say this about creatures in the sea being tamed, because that really is a modern thing, I thought. But that's the way he said it. But the tongue, he said, can no man tame. It's an unruly evil full of deadly poison. Therewith bless we God, even the Father, and therewith curse we men who are made after the similitude of God. Note, James has not changed the subject. He is still on the same basic theme of people who are angry with other people. The wrath of man does not work the righteousness of God. We get to talking sometimes, and the first thing you know, on the one hand, we're very religious, and we're blessing God, and we're talking about all these wonderful things that God has done. And we can turn right around and pronounce a curse on our fellow man, who is made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceeds blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not so to be. In nature, it's not that way. He says a fountain doesn't send forth at the same place sweet water and bitter. A fig tree doesn't bear olive berries. A vine doesn't bear figs. No fountain yields salt water and fresh. Well, how in the world is it that you and I sometimes get to where we're saying, well, we're putting out salt water and fresh out of the same mouth? Human beings can do that. Fountains can't. But he does say of us it shouldn't be that way. Tell me, he says, who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you? You got a lot of knowledge? How about your education? Show me your degree. Let's put all the certificates on the wall and talk about our master's degrees and our doctor's degrees and all of our knowledge of the Bible and the hours that we have spent in Bible study courses. Who's a wise man and endowed with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conduct his works with meekness of wisdom. Oh, that's interesting. There is wisdom, and then there is a meekness of wisdom. So you can have wisdom without meekness, and that wisdom is not particularly helpful. Wisdom of meekness. If you have bitter envying, though, and strife in your hearts, don't glory and don't lie against the truth. Don't get yourself exalted. Don't glory. Don't be proud and start telling lies against the truth. For where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work. Strife. What's strife? It's bickering. It's arguing. It's getting mad at somebody because he doesn't agree with you. It's getting furious and refusing to speak to somebody for a period of time because of some real or imagined slight. It's having and bearing grudges against brethren in the church and not going to them and sorting out your difficulties, which is always within your power to do. You know why it is that we keep on hating people when we could work it out? Pride. Ego. We're going to have to give up some of our pride if we're going to sit down with our brother and say, hey, I'm sorry if I hurt you. I meant well. Can we work this out? He then said, that wisdom which is above is first pure, and then peaceable, and then gentle, easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy, and the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace. Now, in your lifetime, you have heard a lot of stuff that purported to be wisdom, haven't you? You have heard a lot of people speak to you. You have read writings of a lot of people who seemed to be wise. I remember years ago that I had a friend who had a remarkable knack for seeing through people and situations. He was a man who had wisdom, a man who had insight, and a man whose judgment of horseflesh, as we would say, of other people, was remarkably accurate. However, he also was kind of aware of that, became somewhat proud of that, and oftentimes applied it in a way that hurt. His remarks could often cut. They often bruised. He was frequently intimidating. There were many times, when I found myself going away just terribly depressed from having been with him and having discussed something, and it wasn't because he was wrong, he was right, it was just the way everything had come about. I prayed for that man. I prayed that God would help him to see what he was doing, and I'd been praying about it for about a week, I think. I forget all the details of it. It's been a long time. And one morning he came by my office, as he often did. He picked up a cup of coffee, and he came down and put his feet up, and he said, Ron, he said, I was praying this morning. He said, I came across this scripture in James 3, verse 17. That wisdom from above is first pure and then peaceable and gentle and easy to be entreated. And he says, I haven't been that way. And I'm sorry. He said, I know that I have not been easy to be entreated. I've known that people had a hard time talking to me. And I know I have not been gentle in the things that I said. I worked for two guys in this at the same time. One of them who himself, I would say this man was not endowed with a great deal of wisdom. He often seemed in some ways to be kind of foolish in the way he went about doing things. He was certainly very, very naive. But he was easy to be entreated, and he was always gentle. I remember him calling me in once to have a talk with me because I had kind of gotten out of line and I needed to be talked to. Well, he spent the first half hour of this conversation telling me what a fine fellow I was, what I had to contribute, and what a contribution I had made, and what he thought I could make, and he just built me up for a half hour, and then finally at the end of that thing he said, now, there is just this one thing. He said that I think if you could get this squared away, would make you a lot better minister. And he told me what I needed to know. In raw terms, one of these men was way ahead of the other in terms of wisdom, knowledge, and insight. But the one with less wisdom, knowledge, and insight was more effective for the simple reason that he was gentle. But I was encouraged by the fact that my friend, and he was my friend, one of the best I've ever had, that when I prayed about it, that he came to see inside of himself that he had not been gentle, that he had not been easy to be entreated, that he had been very unmerciful in some of his evaluations of other people. And it's very easy for us to become partial, as this says, and to have a certain amount of hypocrisy in the things that we say. That wisdom which is from above is first pure. It's then peaceable. It doesn't create fights. It doesn't create bickering. It doesn't get involved in arguments. It is gentle and easy to be entreated. What's an entreaty? Well, it's when you go to someone and you say, look, can we talk about this? Can we sort this problem out? Would you please mind not doing that anymore? These are entreaties that we make to people. Wisdom which is from above is easy to be entreated. Now, there are some of us that tend to be intimidating from time to time. I know myself, I have been in that category. And I'm very thankful, frankly, for my years in the Church of God International that have helped me begin at least to try to break out of that mold. And we all need to come to, understand that peaceable, easy to be entreated, conduct toward one another is the thing that makes all the difference in the world as far as a church and as far as us being together as a church. He goes on to say, the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. I don't think one person in 10 understands what that scripture means. Because my impression of what most people, when they start talking about this, mean is that I got two brothers over here that are fighting with one another, and I'm going to go over and I'm going to try to solve this problem between my brothers. Now, there is another name for that besides peacemaking. It's called meddling. That oftentimes we confuse peacemaking with meddling. Do you know where the real, true peacemaker is to be found? It's in one of the parties of the dispute, not in a third party. The person who is the true peacemaker, who is the child of God, is the person who is mad at somebody and somebody is mad at him, who extends his hand and says, can we talk this over? And can't we sort this out? And why do we have to be mad at one another? That's the peacemaker, not the third party, otherwise known as meddler. That's not where it is. The fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace. Make peace. Now, we can do things about, apparently peace then is something that can be made. You know, we know how to make a cake. We know how to make breakfast. We know how to, I made a doghouse once, got some lumber and built one up and tried my best to get rid of it after, as I moved away from the house. I was very determined to leave it behind. It was so bad. But we make things. Can you make peace? Can you consciously and deliberately collect your materials, gather your tools together, and set out singing, hi ho, it's off to work we go, and make peace? I'll bet you can. I'll bet you can. You really think about it and plan for it and think in terms of your relationship that you have with people. There are ways. James 4, verse 1. From whence come wars and fightings among you? It makes you wonder what James had heard, doesn't it? He's been hearing stuff. He's aware of things. From whence come wars and fightings among you? Don't they come of your lusts that war in your members? Lusts probably doesn't say in our language what James was trying to say. Basically, lust to him meant wrong desires. You're wanting the wrong things. A lot of this comes about because you want the wrong things, and these wars, and they go warring back and forth among you. You lust and have not. You kill and desire to have and cannot obtain. You fight and war, and yet you have not because you ask not. Now, you kill, he said, and desire to have. Now, from our perspective, that's a little hard to get our mind around. But if I understand what I read in my New Testament, that he who is angry with his brother without a cause is guilty of murder. Now, none of us have killed anybody. And I don't know in the modern world in religious organizations that anybody has ever been killed. But you do know, don't you, that in generations past they have been? That they have been killed not merely one or two at a time. They have been killed in their tens and in their hundreds and in their thousands since the first century. And many of these killings, many of these murders have come about because of anger, which turned to hatred. And a lot of that anger and hatred pivoted on things, just terribly important things like questions of whether the came out from the Father and the Son or from the Father through the Son. The differences that exist between some of us today who attend church together would be and could be and have been big enough in years gone by that people have killed one another for them. They killed one another because there was no one to make peace. He said, you ask, and you receive not, because you ask amiss, that you may consume it upon your wrong desires. And then he said, you adulterers and adulteresses. Now, that came right in out of left field to me on that one as I was reading along, because I can follow all the stuff he's talking about. Now he says, you adulterers and adulteresses. You know, I have to think that he is speaking in spiritual terms here. That he is not necessarily talking about somebody being next door with his neighbor's wife. He is talking about it in the sense that the Old Testament uses the term of spiritual adultery or idolatry. That's all I can understand from the way he is doing. And he says, because he goes on and explains in a sense, he says, don't you know that the friendship of the world is an enmity with God? Whoever therefore will be a friend of the world is an enemy of God. Do you think that the Scripture says in vain, to no purpose, the Spirit that dwells in us lusts enviously? What's he saying? He is saying simply this, that the normal way human beings are is competitive. We tend to be competitive. And as I've said somewhere else, God made us that way, and so that tendency toward competition is not wrong. We were born to win. but we weren't born to defeat. We weren't born to hurt. We weren't born to put people down or to ride over people or to step on people. The Scripture that dwells in us lusts after the wrong things, always does. But God gives more grace, wherefore He said, God resists the proud, but He gives grace to the humble. The proud, the humble. The proud, the humble. The angry, the peacemaker. The hater, the giver, the lover. These things are interesting, aren't they? You know, I have concluded, I think it's possible, I know it's possible to be angry with someone you love. It's not possible to hate someone you love. There's an enormous difference between those things, and you know, it's incredible that sometimes anger can fix on another human being who is a brother in the church, and we can come to hate one another. It's possible. It has happened. Thank God it isn't here. At least it's not here as far as I know. He then says, submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, he'll draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be afflicted, that's fast, and mourn, and weep, and let your laughter be turned to mourning, and your joy to heaviness. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. Notice, he hasn't gone away from the subject. Listen again. Speak not evil one of another, brethren. Just don't do that. Don't speak evil of one another. He that speaks evil of his brother and judges his brother speaks evil of the law and judges the law. And if you're become a judge of the law, then you're not a doer of the law, but a judge. You know, when all is said and done, there is one lawgiver who is able to save and destroy. That being the case, who are you that judges another? You know, that actually what James is trying to tell us is that when we start speaking evil of one another, we stab somebody in the back, behind his back, that we are actually sitting in judgment of one another and are usurping the prerogative of God. And the implication is this: if we do that we are going to have judgment without mercy who have shown no mercy. Go to now, you that say tomorrow or today we'll go into such a city and you're going to make these grandiose plans, you know, we're going to buy and sell and get gain. He says, you don't know what's going to be on the morrow. What's your life? It's a vapor. It appears for a little time and then vanishes and is gone. A little steam that comes up and then you look away and look back and it's not there anymore. That's what our life is. And so we have all of our plans and all the great things that we are going to do and all the things that we're going to accomplish. Our great swelling ego. He says, you ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live first, and then we will do this or we will do that. But you know, your rejoicing and your boastings and all such rejoicing is evil. Therefore, to him that knows to do good and does it not, to him it is sin. James theme, what you do is what counts, not what you know. Simply knowing it is good is not enough. You've got to apply it somewhere. You've got to touch a life with it somewhere. You've got to change the way you treat people somewhere. You've got to lay aside the boasting and the pride which allows you to be angry and to focus that anger into hatred on another human being. Otherwise, if you can't get rid of that, if you can't deal with that, if that can't find its way to the application between people, there's no religion here. There's nothing here at all. Chapter 15. Sorry, not 15, chapter 5. Looking at my note wrong. Verse 14. Is any sick among you? Let him call for the elders of the church and let them pray over him and anoint him with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer of faith shall save the sick, and the Lord shall raise him up. And if he has committed sins, they shall be forgiven him. Confess your faults one to another, and pray for one another that you may be healed. You know, it's really good from time to time for us to own up to the weaknesses that we have, to own up to our problems, to confess our sins. This isn't talking about a formal confessional where you've got a little booth off to one side and one person who's designated to sit in there and hear the confessions of everybody in the church. That's not the point. And it also doesn't mean that you've got to go back and dredge up some terrible thing that you did several years ago and tell it to somebody else in the church. That's not the point. What is the point then? The point is, there's not a person in this room who is faultless. There are none of us here who are not encompassed about with sin. And to be able to confess to another person here I am weak. I make mistakes. I commit sin. I've done stupid things. Is simply to say, I am no better than you are. I am no better than you. What a tremendous revelation. That if we all understand that we are no better than one another, then where are we going to find a grip for the anger? Where is the handhold for the anger? Well, the handhold for the anger always comes about because of pride. But on the other hand, if I am no better than you are, if I have nothing to be proud of other than what you might have, then where is the handhold for anger? And certainly, where is the focus for hate? Anger can come and anger can go. Once in a while, some of us get mad at one another. And it comes and it goes. You can be angry. You can get your nose hot and not sin. But when it moves from the nose to the heart, you've sinned. Because then it has turned to hate. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. And there are times that you apply yourself to this that you are going to be absolutely astonished at what happens. But you know, when you take in hand to pray for another human being, you have taken upon yourself a burden that you must not lay down. Because not only will God answer your prayer He will answer your prayer sometimes to help a person see a mistake and change. But you see, my old friend who saw on that one morning that he had not been easy to be entreated, that he had been impulsive, that he had not been merciful, he was responding to a habit and a way of life that had been with him for years. Praying about that once and giving him the support and holding him up once was not enough. There comes a place when we pray for someone and the prayer is answered, you have got to carry on in praying for people. You may have to carry them for a long time because of the human weakness that is there, because of the habits that are there, because of the angers that are there, because of the hostility that is there, and it's been there for years, and it isn't going to be gone just because you prayed for them tonight and they were over it today. Sometimes you've got to pray long. Elijah was a man subject to like passions as we are. Elijah was no better than we are. How's that for news? He was a man of like passions as we are. And he prayed earnestly that it might not rain, and it rained not on the earth by the space of 3 years and 6 months. It makes you wonder, did he have to keep it from raining every day? He prayed again, and the heaven gave rain, and the earth brought forth her fruit. Brethren, if any of you do err from the truth, and one convert him, let him know that he which converts the sinner from the error of his way shall save a soul from death and shall hide a multitude of sins. Do you understand what that says? I don't know if you have understood this, and I want to be sure that we do understand this. Do you realize that he said here that if you err from the truth, that it is possible for somebody to convert you? But doesn't God convert us all? Isn't this a thing that takes place between man and God? Is it possible for one of you to convert another one of you? Well, let's see. Let him know that he which converts the sinner from the error of his way, yeah, I guess so, shall save a soul from death and shall hide a multitude of sins. My goodness. Now, how can you convert a sinner? Well, you know, there is a power that we have which we oftentimes do not use and do not use effectively. I think it's very possible that this power may be greater in a person's life sometimes than sometimes even what God accomplishes, and I want to have to be very careful to explain to you what I'm trying to say. We oftentimes do not do bad things that we otherwise might do because we know that someone who loves us would be disappointed in us. Okay? someone loves me. Someone thinks very highly of me. Someone would never imagine or believe that I would do such a thing. And therefore, I don't do it because I will disappoint that person. We actually don't do things that we might have done. We do things that we might not have done because someone cares about us, loves us, and would be disappointed if we didn't measure up to what they thought we were going to do. Sure, that is absolutely true. In fact, a perverse version of that is seen among teenage kids. They call it peer pressure. And there's a strong pressure in a family. The problem with it is that it often isn't recognized, but the source of it is often not recognized. The source of it is love. Just merely expecting a lot of somebody else doesn't get it done. Merely telling people what you expect of them, that doesn't get there. Merely telling people what you want accomplishes very little. What accomplishes something is when you love someone, and the love shows in the way you treat people, in the way that you treat them, in the way that you encourage them, in the way that you support them, in the way you lift them, in the way you touch them, that they know that you love them, and they will not do things that they should not do, because you love them. Now, God loves us. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth upon him should not perish but have everlasting life. And we know that, and we believe that. And yet God somehow is not as near to us as our mother. Is not as near to us as Dad. God's not anywhere near as close as these people sitting right here in the room with you now. And you don't see his face. You don't see his pleasure. You don't see his displeasure. You don't feel his nose getting hot. But you can detect it in one another. And the love that we share in families and the love that we share in the church is a powerful force for the conversion of people, because conversion means change. You can change people, not by expecting things of them, but because you love them and expect things of them. That's where the difference comes. You know, I was reading this chapter here, and I got to the end, and it says, "Brethren, if any of you do err from the truth, and one convert him, let him know that he that converts the sinner from the error of his ways shall save a soul from death." Whew, boy, the stakes are high, aren't they? And then I said to myself, well, why doesn't James then go on with another chapter to tell us how to go about converting this other person? And then it dawned on me. He already has. The whole book up until this place is about the way our lives touch the lives of other people. Our anger, our vanity, our pride, our running off at the mouth, our actually taking care of people who are poor, our making people who are cold warm, and people who are hungry full, as opposed to saying be warmed and filled. All of these things are the ways in which we love people. And when we love people, and then we expect things of them, people can be converted. And we can actually save a soul from death. That's a lesson from the book of James.